Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode 2 of the Seth-Talk-Show, where in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Japan and discussing how Japan was able to avoid colonization and the side effects of doing so. So, if any of this sounds interesting to you, then stay tuned because it's bound to be fun. Anyway, cue the intro. Welcome back, everyone. So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing 3 different questions that I made myself just about Japan because, that's the assignment. So our 3 questions today are, number 1, what made Japan such a bad target for colonizing? Question number 2, what impact did the Portuguese have on Japan? And our big main question that we're going to be answering today is how has Japan been able to avoid colonization for all this time? So that's a big main one. We're just going to do some to branch off of that. But yeah, we're going to be discussing those 3 things today. So let's get into it. The story of Japan is actually quite interesting. Now, Japan is one of the few nations from around the world that did not get affected by colonization, and the reasons to why are also very interesting. But before we do talk about that, we should talk about Japan's brief encounter with the Portuguese and how that affected them. The Portuguese Empire landed on the shores of Japan in 1543 to try and expand their religion and economics into Japan. This was actually beneficial for both nations because Japan got to buy things like silk and guns, which will be important later, from the Portuguese because they couldn't buy these things directly from China because of the contact ban that the Chinese put them on. And the Portuguese also benefited from this as they got to expand their religion farther through Asia as they intended. Shortly after Portugal arrived, they started a very successful slave trade using Japanese people, which were mostly women. This continued on for many years until the Portugal leader realized that having a slave trade would not be good for his country, because his country was trying to display a very angelic Christian persona to try and spread their religion everywhere. So he ordered a ban on the trade in 1571, but this didn't really do anything to help it, so it kept on continuing until the Japanese leader finally had enough and banned the contact with the Portuguese, which meant that the slave trade was over. So yeah, that was basically just the end of that. The slave trade was officially banned from Japan in 1595, and the relationship between Japan and Portugal was not very good. Japan now saw Portugal more as an enemy than a friend, so yeah. So now on to question 2. So question 2 is what made Japan such a bad target for colonizing? Now this is also quite an interesting question because there are a couple major factors that played into this, and we're going to discuss those in one moment. So even though Japan did have some things to offer the European nations, it just wasn't really worth it to go all in on Japan. A couple major factors played into this. First off, Japan was a very powerful nation, and like I said earlier, Japan had acquired tons of guns and other firearms from Portugal, and they also had a lot of people for their nation. They had a large nation and an equally large population, which meant that to take out Japan, you would need to send a lot of troops and equipment. For the European powers, this just wasn't really worth it. For all that Japan had to offer in terms of resources and stuff, it just wasn't really worth it for the European powers to send ships upon ships of troops and equipment and then they had to cross the sea. So yeah. It wasn't worth it for the European nations to send all that troops and stuff and then have to cross the sea and maybe even ultimately fail because Japan was too powerful. It just wasn't worth it for them to do that because Japan didn't even have that much resources and stuff to offer. So quite frankly, it just wasn't worth it for them to do that. So they just kind of left Japan alone. So our last question for the day is, how did Japan avoid colonization all the way through history? And the answer to this question is a mix between luck and power. Japan's location in the world helped a ton for them to not get colonized. Japan is on the very edge of Asia and is very difficult a place to invade, which made Japan a lot less of a hotspot when it came to European travelers. Japan also did not have a very unique or special natural resource, which made it basically pointless for them to be invaded, I guess. And the invaders didn't really gain anything besides like the land. And the last reason I believe that Japan avoided colonization is because of its sheer strength. You can't really just say that Japan is only lucky, because Japan also had a very good military and they were smart with their battle decisions. That and also the, like, you know, when they got a bunch of guns and stuff from Portugal, which was also like, yeah, that helped them a ton. And it made them a very scary threat, so people just didn't see it as, it was like, people didn't see Japan as a worthy place to like take over. So I feel like that's the main reasons why Japan never got colonized. And there we are. There's all 3 questions answered. And yeah, I think Japan is like a really interesting place to learn about. I don't know. I had fun like watching all the videos and reading all the websites about Japan and how this all like went down. I think Japan is probably my favorite place around the world to learn about. So yeah, that's cool. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, that has been me, Seth. And yeah, there's another episode of the Seth-Talk-Show. Anyway, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And yep, peace out. Bye.